Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and this is going to be SolidJS in 20 minutes. The goal here is to learn as much about the basics of SolidJS as possible. So SolidJS is one of the newer front-end frameworks, and it's pretty sweet. Essentially, the summary of its promise is that it kind of gives you a syntax that's very similar to React. So if you're a React developer, using SolidJS should feel pretty natural because it's going to feel a lot like React. But instead of having a runtime like React, so basically you're shipping your code and all this other React code that runs while the user is exploring your application, it's more like Svelte in the sense that it compiles it down to sort of just standard HTML, CSS, so no runtime has to be shipped. Okay, so it's but it has a lot of cool little ways you can optimize your code depending on how you write your SolidJS code, that you could write apps that are actually even faster than Svelte in a syntax that's very much like React, with without some of the eccentricities, or the necessariness of some of the eccentricities, like things like the weirdness of like the use effect hook and such. So it's pretty solid, right? It sounds pretty solid, and I personally love it. But yeah, let's show you how we set this up. Okay, so first let's just remember what the command is to set up a new project. npm, I want to say it's like npm init solid, but or solid app, docs. Nope, that's not what I'm looking for. Get started. Here we go. Okay. Cool. Let's see here. By far, use really starts to try our repo. Blah blah blah. Okay, yeah. So they just have this npx. And if you're not familiar with npx was a library I think created by Rich Harris, the guy who created Svelte and Rollup. And what it does, it clones a Git repo without having to also create a repo on your folder, which is great because then you don't have to always do that extra step of like removing the repo after you cloned it. So I love dgit. It's one of my favorite little libraries. But in this case, we're just cloning this SolidJS templates.js, and then we're going to call it my first solid app. Okay, so see that clone the template, and then I'm going to cd into my first solid app. Okay, and then we end up here, and it's going to look a lot like React. So again, you have a HTML file, because again, the way all these frameworks work is they just kind of send a empty HTML file to the browser, and then we mount an app component to this div of root. That's generally how it kind of always works. So then what happens, everything gets done from within the app component. So just like React, there's an app.jsx. Okay, and it looks a lot like React. It's a function that returns JSX. This is one of the things I really like about Solid, because there's another framework that uses JSX, and that is Stencil for building web components. The only catch is that Stencil uses like class-based components, so it has all the eccentricities of old React class components, while this uses function components, which I find much more pleasant to write. So let's run the server so you can kind of see that. Actually, I might need to do an npm install. I don't think I did that yet. Yep, npm install. That's going to install all the dependencies. It uses Vite or Vite as the bundler, which is like blazing fast, because it takes advantage of ES modules, so you're not compiling everything into one file like you would with like a Webpack or a Rollup. What it does is that it breaks every JavaScript file into its own module on the other end. So when you update things, it only has to update that module, making it for much faster reloads when you're in development mode, which is super sweet. So npm run dev, I think is the command. Yep, cool. So let me go to localhost 3000. Okay, and so there's your basic sort of solid app here. So let me just bring down DevTools a little bit. Okay, cool. And that just kind of spins. Wonderful. So just like React, I could just empty this all out. Kind of pretty much works the same way. I'm going to get rid of the CSS module. And there's CSS modules by default in there. That's another neat thing. Okay, but I won't get into that right now. Okay, and it's not happy with just the div, because it wants more than just the div. So I will give it more than just a div. We'll just say h1 hello world. Okay. How did I break it already? Just take a look at these curly brackets. Oh, I see. There's a curly bracket there. There we go. Okay. And basically, I can do things like I could do in React. I could, again, create variables. So I can say, like, there's a variable called const cheese, and then that can equal, you know it, Gouda. And I can inject it, just like I can in React, with using curly brackets. Cheese. Cool. Okay. But the other two sort of big ideas from React are like props and state. So how would I achieve those patterns? First, let's create another component so you can see how we use another component. So I will create a new folder called components. And in this folder called components, I will create a counter.js, X actually technically, and then I create a function. So function counter. Okay, this component will receive props just like normal. Okay, and then right now we'll just say return counter. Cool. And then we just export default counter. Okay, so far really nothing too different than writing normal React code. So I'm just writing a function that exports JSX. I'm exporting it. Good. So now when I use this, cool. Cheese. Oh yeah, I'm gonna import the component. So I would just import the component, import counter from ./components/counter. And now I could just use it just like you would expect to use it in React. Very cool. Very nice. Now, that's all well and good. And I see it right here. And I can pass it props. So if I were to pass it a prop called bread equals rye, just like we would in pretty much any of these frameworks, I can then go over here and then use that too. So I'll just wrap these in divs. Actually, I think I can use fragments here too. Okay, pretty much all the rules of JSX still apply. The only difference is that it's not, again, not being rendered into React code. The JSX is being rendered into solid, well, really to plain HTML, CSS, JavaScript. JSX has become this super popular intermediary because it's also used, again, in Stencil to build web components. It's used in mitosis that compiles it down to like this universal JSON format. JSX is cool. And again, JSX is just a special HTML-like syntax that was created by Facebook, originally for React, but it's been adapted in a lot of other applications because it's just dandy. I like JSX. Okay, counter. Okay, so we do the counter, and let's say I want to use the props of bread. I can just be like h2 props.bread. Okay, so a lot of the patterns here don't really change too much to how they would work in React. I could pass props this way, access them through the parameter of props. Okay, that's all great. Now, state is where things start changing. Okay, instead of using like a use state hook, what you do is you import, I think it's like create, it's escaping me at the moment, so let me just do from SolidJS, and I can just go over here and say create context, deferred, effect. No, effect is going to be like if you want to create an expression that should be reactive. So you would pass in a function to create effect in the same way you would use effect. The only difference is that you're kind of doing the opposite of use effect. Use effect is you're trying to do something that's outside of the component's re-rendering. The difference is that SolidJS doesn't automatically just re-render the whole function. It's always going to re-render the JSX piece, so that's an effect all by automatically. But then you can create more effects, things that you want, parts of your code that you want to repeat when the reactive variables inside of it get used. So really what we want to do is create a signal. Okay? A signal is essentially like a variable that when it changes, it'll signal to any effects that it is used in to reevaluate, which would then update the DOM. So in this case, I don't have to worry about like my whole component rendering every piece of its logic again. I can designate which parts of my component's stuff through the create effect thing I want to run again. Okay, so it's kind of like the opposite of the logic with React, where the whole function runs every time, and then you have to kind of use effect to kind of break out of that chain. Okay. So in this case, but I would otherwise it should feel the same. Okay, I do const. Then what we do is we'll just say like get counter, because the thing to realize is that technically another big difference is that create signal doesn't give you back like a variable and a function. It actually gives you back two functions, a getter and a setter function. So they're really two functions, but not too far different than what you're used to. Create signal, and we're going to start the count at 0. So now from within my JSX, I can just treat it like normal. So I can just inject get counter, because when it's compiled, it knows that when it gets a get one of these getter functions to just run it. But when I write my add one function, so if I were to write a add one function, const add one to add one to the number. So again, we'll just write a function. Normally, what I would do is I would just say like get counter plus equals 1, like if it was React. Or not exactly. I would do set counter, and I would do it to get counter plus equals 1. That's not how you're going to do it here, because technically this is not the value. So if I were to click on this, so let's say I make this h3 clickable. So just like React, I do on click equals add 1. If I were to click on this, this is going to end up going wrong. So it's not working because get counter technically is the function. So if I want to access it here, I need to use the parentheses, because it's going to invoke the function and get that number. Okay, and what doesn't like about that? Callback SolidJ, invalid left hand in the assignment. Oh, because I did plus equals. It's really just plus 1. There we go. But then if I click this, see, it works. Okay, so that's the main point. It's just the difference is that when you do this getter and setter, the first variable is technically a function. It works just the same in your JSX. You can refer to it without having to invoke it, but outside of your JSX, you do have to invoke it, just so you're aware of it. I don't mind that. I think it's a little bit more explicit. Makes this is more consistent. Two functions than like a variable and a function. I don't mind it. Cool. So that's how you do state. You just create a signal in the same way you would create a use state hook, and then you just use it. Okay. And whenever you use set counter to set the value of the counter, it's gonna say, hey, the signal is gonna emit, and then anything that uses the signal will then re-render. But now let's see here, like if I inject this console log here, let's say I do a console log of cheese. Normally in React, every time the component rebuilds itself, re-renders, I would see that console log again, because again the whole function is running. So let's see here. Would I see that? And actually, let me console log counter. Actually, it would be get counter. Get counter. There we go. So let's see. We go to the console, and I refresh the page. See, I get 0. Now let's see what happens as it changes. See, notice the console log is not repeating itself, because the way Solid is working is that this JSX here is automatically what's called an effect, but the rest of the function is not automatically an effect. So as this variable changes, only this is updating. We're not running the whole function again. So if you did want to run a portion of the function again, that's where you'd use the create effect, I guess, hook. Okay? And then here we would do like create effect. Okay, and then you just pass in a function. Okay. And in here, you could just use whatever you want. So in this case, I would console.log get counter. And then I'll just add a little extra text so we can see that this is in effect. And now if I refresh this, see, we see the console log of 0, normal, this one right here, no text. And then we see the one in the effect, which is this one right here. And now let's see what happens when I click on here. See, the in effect one runs again. So see, it's like the opposite of the logic of use effect. I create an effect when I want something to repeat. If I don't need it to repeat, then I just do it like normal. Okay, which makes more sense. Like having to do use effect, having to go out of your way to do something once seems like outside the normal bounds of programming, because usually, you have to go out of your way to write a loop or whatnot. In this case, or use a function to repeat something. So in this case, you assume that unless it's an effect, again, this is an effect because I created it, and whenever you use these functions, it's only going to pay attention to signals used inside of it. So if I had multiple pieces of state, multiple signals, this is knows to only listen to get counter. So this effect will only run. So just to show you that example of that, if I do const, get cheese, set cheese, and then we create another signal called cheese that starts off with a string of cheese, and then every time, and we'll have another function called const add e, which equals set cheese. Every time we do that, it's going to be set get cheese plus e. So we're just going to add an e to cheese. Then we'll just add another h3 where on click equals add e. Then in here we'll add get cheese. Okay. Let's refresh. So there's cheese. Okay, and then I'm going to create another one of these effects. And this one will be, say, get cheese. Okay, so now notice, again, if I click the counter, see, only the effect that uses get counter repeats. This effect does not repeat. And then if I click on the cheese, E is not defined. Oh, this is supposed to be the string of E. My bad. Okay, refresh. If I click on the cheese, see, only that is repeating itself. So in this case, it's not like use effect where I have to put I have to specify a dependency. It just knows that if there's a signal inside of it and it is updated to rerun this function. And again, since both of those are used in here, this is always re-rendering when either of them change. So, which is nice because you're not getting needless re-renders in places that you don't use a particular signal. So if I no longer refer to get cheese here, this will not re-render itself when cheese changes. Okay, although cheese can't really change now, but theoretically that would be the case because it's not referred to here, which is cool. Okay, so just to give you an idea of how all that is technically kind of working a little bit different. And there's a whole bunch of other features. As you saw here, when I started typing in create, there's a lot of other cool things that it has available to you. But otherwise, it's the same patterns you're used to in any of these kind of frameworks. But you can build faster apps because they're compiled down to just plain HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. But again, there's a lot of optimizations that are under the hood. When it does that, because of the way you write your code, again, you can write your code in a way that sort of really optimizes where things are reactive. That really allows you to have much faster code. Okay, and again, here's the index.jsx. So just like you would expect, it renders that app component to the div with the ID of root. So pretty straightforward from there. This is SolidJS in 20 minutes. I'll see you all later. This is Alex Merced. Have a great day.